Good evening, everyone. We're debating whether or not to put this up tonight or tomorrow. So it finally happened. After 9 months of throwing it out there that anyone that wants to come on and talk about my work from a religious standpoint, or just any Christian that wants to come on my channel, someone finally took me up on it. And his name is Jacob, and he's from the Cult of Conspiracy podcast. How's it going, bud?
Hey, brother, how are you?
Good. So let's just jump right into it since we don't have a lot of time, the both of us.
No doubt.
First of all, thank you for coming on.
Great brother, anytime.
And so you watched my 2.5 hour, basically it's not all encompassing, but you watched my whole 2.5 hour video, right?
I did. First off, I would love to say before anything, thank you so much for having me on the show as a representative of the Cult of Conspiracy, as well as some other projects that we're doing. But also, I have to tell you, as a fellow, I don't want to say content creator, because that makes it sound dirty, and I don't like that. But At the same time, the material that you sourced and the research that you did behind everything, sir, phenomenal job. Like, I have to say, as far as the presentation goes, it was exactly, I think, the intent that you were trying to portray. I think it came across beautifully. So
thank you.
Kudos to you, sir.
I appreciate that.
No doubt.
Thank you for admitting that. I do appreciate that very much.
No doubt, brother. I'm all about giving credit where credit's due. Now, that being said, you came on our show, I want to say about a month ago, give or take.
Was it really that long already?
I don't even know. Time has lost whatever gap it's supposed to
take
like up.
2 weeks ago.
It may have been. Honestly, dude, I work a crazy work schedule on top of a podcast. I can never tell if it's yesterday or tomorrow, but I know it's not today. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
go on.
But so when you came on our show, we talked, and you gave it a very, now that I've seen the 2.5 hour version of it, you gave a very condensed Cliff Notes version of your presentation. I was going to say spiel, but that's not it either. Your presentation.
Right.
So watching the entire 2.5 hours of it, I found fascinating and entertaining because I love mythology from around the world. I love religions from around the world. I love digging into the history of it. And your presentation pretty much encompasses all of that in a nice, neat little bow. So.
Right. It does. And I always find it very interesting because I do have, well, first and foremost, I have to say, is I have zero problem with Christians. It's not the people that I have an issue with.
I do, for the record. I'm a Christian and I have problems with Christians.
Right. Well, they're just in general, like people, I understand them as people who want to better themselves. But then you get into the kind of groups of people where they're basically like you walk into church and they're all dressed up and judgmental. And we know those kind of people. And I'm not really into that, but I don't have problems with the Christians. It's the stories behind it. It's the truths that they're trying to tell. Now, I have a population of the people on my channel who, for some reason or another, are Christians and who tell me that my presentation further enhances their belief, and I'm just dumbfounded. I was hoping
it did for me.
I was hoping that you could explain your side because I'm not here to attack you. I'm just here to learn and understand. I'm genuinely curious as to how
brother.
I did that presentation, which was basically against everything, enhanced you. So please go on and feel free to cite examples or just let me know.
Okay, so let's start from the absolute very, very beginning to now. And then I guess at the closing of this, it'll kind of wrap up why I think your presentation more or less confirmed my beliefs and made me look at things from a newer perspective, which was awesome. All right, so let's just dive straight in. We're talking about primarily Western zodiacs, correct? Western astrology.
Well, we are talking about that because if you're talking about things like that, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, they're all in the northern hemisphere and they're all in the west. That's where the holy books come from, at least Western. So yes, it is from the west.
That's fair. And I would love to hear your take. And this is not a conversation for today because this is going to take its own deep dive, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I would love to see with your beliefs and what you believe you have found as far as how the stars correlate to religion, which correlate to morals and all of that. I am very curious how you feel about Eastern astrology. I am very curious how you feel about Central American astrology and the mythos that go along behind all of that. And one day you and I are going to have that talk.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
primarily speaking of Western, okay? So you're saying essentially that the zodiacs in the sky correlate to a season of the year. The stars are essentially a calendar that resets itself, and that human civilization has used these since the dawn of time to make our calendars as the planting season, as the harvest season, as the seasons of ... Correct?
Right. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I have no faults with this, for the record. To me, when you look at the earliest form of mankind, I'm not talking about the cave dwellers. I mean like early mankind. The fact that they would pull from every resource they had available to find as much food, water, shelter, fire as they could to survive makes perfect sense. The fact that they would use the stars that are out every single night and use those to gauge their time of year, their time of everything, makes perfect sense to me. The fact that these earliest humans would also all develop sun worship in some way, shape, or form makes perfect sense to me as well. None of those things detract from the good book. None of those actually detract from any religion, in my opinion. That's more or less earliest man. And I would say it's in man's most ignorant state, but at the same time, man's most attuned to nature state. Because I believe that the two in the prehistoric era went hand in hand. Now we have a generation of people who are trying to get extremely attuned to nature in their natural habitat, but who have also never lived in a room without air conditioning before. So we're in this weird subsection of civilization, in my opinion. However, that being said, the earliest man worships the sun because the sun gives them everything. It grows the plants they eat, the animals they eat the plants, and it all goes circle of life, everything revolving around the sun. Makes perfect logical sense to me. When you look at the stars and you see this constellation, that constellation, Virgo the Virgin, Taurus the Bull, Cancer the Crab, yada yada. And honestly, I only named those three because those are like three of the only five I know. That's beside the point. But that being said, to say that the earliest man looked up at the constellation of Taurus and they knew that it was on the horizon from this date to this date, and they knew that that was the proper time of year to hook up to the oxen and plow their fields.
Right.
Okay, perfect example. They knew that this time of year was going to be the time to plant their harvest, or to sow the seeds, I should say. They looked up at all the speckles in the sky, played connect the dots, made a bull, and said, boom, this is the season of Taurus the bull. It could have just as easily been Flim Flam the unicorn.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's where I guess
there is a little bit of a general it's hard to explain why these 12 came out about when they could have very easily been anything else. Right. But the thing is that it's undeniable that it is the 12. That is what they saw. And it's undeniable that it's been that way since civilization started writing things down. So, and when I trace back the original constellations to the Lascaux Cave 17,000 years ago, it was known back then too. So was it given to us? Was it something?
Wait, one more time. You said it was known back then. What was the cave? What?
The cave, the Lascaux caves, where I showed you at the beginning with the cave drawings and how they all lined up to the constellations. Right?
Yeah.
So that's right. We've known about these 12 for 17,000 years. So were they given to us at some point by some ancient aliens? Was it something that we just discovered? Because to be able to understand all the constellations, you'd have to go through at least a year. And you'd have to also go through a year multiple times because you'd have to be like, oh, at this particular time, right, these stars did this. And
it would have to be a tracked, chartable
right
thing that you can track for years, decades, centuries, millennium, all of that, and know that this is going to happen like clockwork. This star is going to be coming on the horizon on this day because it happens every year. Like, no doubt.
Right. So where it gets interesting is when I use the zodiac to interpret the biblical passages. And if you notice in the book, I jump from passage to passage, from book to book, to show that it's in a bunch of different books. Mm-hmm. It's not just one book. If it was just one book, it would be interesting and bizarre to begin with. But it's in every single book that you could use this very simple cipher to show patterns in the sky. So the question is, how does something metaphorically or astrologically suddenly become viewed as literal?
Oh, okay. So you're asking, how does a religion, any religion that is meant to be taken, well, at least arguably meant to be taken in a metaphorical sense or a parable sense of education, when does it go from myth to legend to reality? Is that what you're
Yep.
asking? Okay, fair enough. And I would say personally, when I saw tangible proof on this earth. Now, to that point, I am not saying that other religions do not have their own physical proof to validate their claims. I'm sure they do. I don't know of any off the top of my head that actually validate any other claims, but I'm sure they exist. I'm not trying to diminish these people. What I will say is that whenever, for instance, okay, on my show, we actually brought up the plagues of Egypt. Okay. Now, the plagues of Egypt, we know, is a natural phenomenon that happens every 500 years, give or take. However, who's to say that God is not the one who caused them to happen at that moment when Moses was trying to get the Hebrews out of Egypt, per the story of
Explain that
Exodus?
real quick, how the plagues happen every 500 years. Where do you get that from?
Sure. So the blood water actually isn't blood water. The water up the Nile goes into a blood red algae state every 500 years. It makes the water completely undrinkable. It makes all of the vegetation die around it. It makes all of the sea life in the Nile River die. When this happens, the frogs that were eating all the bugs on the Nile River jump out. That would be the swarm of frogs that they got. When the frogs jump out, they start attacking the bugs, which sends them into a frenzy, i.e., the plague of locusts. The only part of the story that cannot be exactly handled naturally is the dying of the firstborn son, which was caused by the angel of death, per my religion, and that's also backed by Egyptian hieroglyphs, as well as the Hebrews being enslaved by the Egyptians. However, at the time, it was called the Hyksos, Hyksos. I'm not 100% sure on the pronunciation. Apologies to all the historians out there. Now, granted, the number of them in Egypt was drastically skewed. Per the Bible, they make it sound like there was like 500,000 people that Moses was leading out of there. It's like more like at most, like, and I'm being super generous when I say this number, 40,000 is pushing it, man. Like real talk.
There's also. Have you heard of the thought process that says that the Nile actually didn't exist back then, that it was dried up? Have you come across that before?
So the Nile does go through ebbs and flows of dry periods and wet periods, just like, for instance, Egypt used to be lush green vegetation, right? And that was all based off of irrigation off the Nile.
Well, you're talking about the Jews leaving Egypt, right? And they literally talk about snow in the Bible. So obviously, at that time frame, it was different.
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, it snowed on the Egyptian pyramids in 1927. I mean, it happens.
True, fair enough.
You know what I mean? I mean, woolly mammoths walked the earth around the time, allegedly, that the pyramids of Egypt were being built. We have no idea what the biodome of America looked, or excuse me. We have no idea what the biodome of the Middle East looked like at that time. We go off of references, but these are the same references that we're questioning in the first place. So, you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, so that being said,
the water and then the frogs and then the bugs. That's an interesting thing. I've never thought of that kind of connection too.
No one really knew about it because no one writes this shit down because it happens every 500 years, right? Have you heard anything interesting of Egypt in the last 1,500 years?
Not particularly, no.
Not particularly. You know what I mean? Because at the time when they were being written about, and at the time where they were this incredible empire with all this technology, this was literally at the arguable birthplace of written history. You know what I mean? So you got to kind of draw your conclusions as best you can. But when we talk about the plagues of Egypt, they were written about. Also, the story of Moses, as far as like him being, the Pharaoh put it down to where they had to kill so many babies of the slave population. That's also documented. Them being fed to the crocodiles. That's also documented. So the story of Moses being put in a basket, pushed down the river, and then being found. Granted, I know that story has been repeated across multiple cultures, across multiple platforms, across multiple millennia. But as far as the backstory for Moses goes, it actually is historically checked. You know what I mean? That's fact checked. We do not have some sort of crazy written history of all of Moses' genealogy, but we do have a record of, well, actually, if I'm not mistaken, they found that out, didn't they?
Moses' genealogy?
Yeah, they did trace Moses' genealogy all the way back to I want to say Noah. Could be wrong. quote me on that one. Don't quote me on that one. I got to do a little more digging before I speak on that one. But anyway, long story short, the backstory of him is at least confirmed. The Exodus from Egypt is confirmed. The perfect example, the parting of the Red Sea, 2017, was confirmed. So, I mean, the more you look historically and the more facts that keep being presented, the more hardened evidence I have to prove that the Abrahamic religions, as of now, are the only ones that I can find based on any kind of historical fact, scientifically backed truth.
Well, do you not agree though that the Bible is not actually original? That a lot of their stories come from Egypt and sort of other places as well.
So, here's the answer that a lot of my fellow faith members would say: no, those stories originated off the Bible. Which, okay, way to fucking cop out all of the world's cultures up until your stint of history, but whatever. But I also believe that some of those stories, like, for instance, the story of Noah and the ark.
Right, that goes back to Gilgamesh, or at least.
Just about to say, people draw comparisons to Gilgamesh. However, the story of Gilgamesh, the Great Flood story, that's transferable across all cultures. Noah with the animals and the boat, that one doesn't necessarily transfer across everything. Some it does, some it doesn't. There's some give or take, you know. But whenever you look at that and you look at, and I personally, this is not a scientifically backed thing, but I believe that's also why humans only use like 14% of our brains, because we're inbred as fuck off the ark. I mean, it was Noah and his, 3 families in total. How many times can you cross-pollinate before we start getting some extra attributes we didn't want, right? Cut to a couple millennia later, and here we are. Humans are here with opposable thumbs, but 14% usage of our entire, you know what I'm saying, the main computer that runs this shit. So, hey.
Now, what about the particular verses in the Bible that I actually used astrology to show? This makes a pattern of 3 signs. This makes a pattern of 4 signs. This does this. This is interpreted, like the 2 in Revelation with the 4 fixed signs, or the dragon with the lady. What about things like that? How do you put a literal spin to that?
So I am very glad that you asked about the end time prophecies, because, and this is a little bit of a shameless plug, but I'm not spending too much on it. My new show, Prophecy Playbook, goes into a deep dive on all of the biblical end time prophecies, and I don't give my interpretation of them. I look at the geopolitical area that we are discussing, and I look at what that area looks like today and what it would look like for that to go into a wartime path against Israel or against whatever the times may be. So as of now, we're in the book of Ezekiel. I will work my way into the book of Revelations as time comes. So I will get into this. However, the comparison has been made by so many different people that the Beast and the Harlot, right? One of my favorite songs from Avenged Sevenfold, I might add. Judge me if I like that band or not. The band used to make good music, whatever. You look at the 10 horns raised from 7 heads, and there's a harlot on it wearing, it was crimson, but then I've also heard that it was supposed to be purple or violet or some shit. I hear that woman is supposed to be the Catholic Church, which is why they wear the color garbs that they wear. And it being a harlot, I mean, you really don't have to reach too far for that comparison. I've heard that the beast, 7 heads with 10 horns, that's going to be 7 countries and 10 figures and right? Here's what I'm going to say. Parts of the Bible are meant to be interpreted. Parts of the Bible are meant to be taken literally. Parts of the Bible are parables that you are meant to get a lesson from. Now, where do you draw the comparison as to what is and what is not meant to be interpreted? What is and is not meant to be taken literal? When I do anything involving the Bible, and to all of your, do you have viewers or listeners or both?
Viewers.
Viewers. All right. So to all the viewers out there, when you read any portion of the Bible, period, ever, period, read the time, the place, and the context and the audience. Ever cast a judgment on it. I could take 3 sentences that Jesus said and make it look any way I want. Look at, who is he speaking to? Is he speaking to the world? Is he speaking to Christianity as a whole? Or is he speaking to specifically the motherfuckers at the church of Ephesus? You know what I'm saying? Is he specifically speaking to the people at the church of Corinth? This is what Christians don't like hearing. They don't like when you dig deeper and you really understand what's supposed to be told to you, you realize how lied to you've been by most of your pastors and most of your lay people. So you realize, oh, So y'all have been doing this as a money racket when it was supposed to be growing my spiritual faith. Okay, well, fuck all of you then. You know what I mean? And that's the issue that I have with a lot of my faith. I have a lot of issues with the churchianity. I don't have a problem with Jesus. I don't have a problem with the Bible. I have a problem with other people that claim to love Jesus in the Bible and will bastardize people and judge people and ostracize. And I just don't have time for it. And that's not what Jesus wanted. That is literally the opposite of what his whole purpose. That being said, when you look at, for instance, when they were about to stone Mary Magdalene, and this is one that people bring up all the time, he stopped them from stoning her. Does this mean that the Old Testament is no longer valid because they were following the laws per the Old Testament? And it's like, no, Jesus didn't break the law. He showed them that they were full of shit. You know what I'm saying? People will take that to literally mean, well, if you're going to cast the first stone at me, no, he's telling you don't be shitty. That's the message. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. People take it and they twist it and they try to make it something that it's not. They miss the entire point. So when you look at prophecy, when you look at stories from the Old Testament, again, time, place, audience, context. The book of Job, for instance, we know is a complete parable. Satan never scoured the earth and then bebopped into heaven to have a little one-on-one with old boy and just be like, hey, God, you're serving Job. Let's talk about it. That's not how things go down. That is the only time in the entire book that anything like that has ever happened. That is a complete parable to teach about having faith, even in the worst of circumstances. You know what I mean? And if I'm not mistaken, isn't Job the oldest book of the Bible ever codified?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
By far. I actually just did a video on the astrology in it, which reminds me of when you saw me break down the book of Job, how he was talking about this animal, and I showed how it was this star, and it's located here, and it's located here. I'm also very open with my audience. I tell people, look, I talk about how the Bible is made up of 10 holy sciences. It's a gematria book. It's an etymology, a numerology book. It's also, it's 10 holy sciences. I just teach one. So I'm not the end-all be-all of answers. I may have the oldest science and I may have the most prevalent science in there, but I'm just interested to understand how my video codified your faith. That's what I want.
All right. Literally just what you said did it. So like you said, the Bible is an instruction manual, right? And that's how it's meant to be taken. If you want to live a good life, follow these rules. If you don't, that's on you. God gave us free will, but understand that there's consequences for your action. And no, I don't mean a horned devil with a pitchfork. Okay. I mean, in your life, if you follow the book, things work out well. If you don't, things will mathematically go south for you. It's a matter of time, right? Look at Epstein. But anyway, my point is, though, that you're right. It is a book with so many levels and so many layers, and it goes so in depth to a level that no one human being, I believe, could ever actually understand it all. That's
I agree with you on that 100%.
And so what you did was open my eyes to the fact that my book is so, and for the record, I don't mean my book, the book that my faith is based in,
right,
is so interwoven in every aspect of our reality that I didn't even understand. You know what I mean? All you did was peel back yet one more layer to the entire story for me. And I'm like, wow, I never even thought about looking at this in the stars. And this is more of a confirmation that God is in control, that his plan is going to play out the way that he wants it to because he is in control. You know what I mean? If anything, all that did was it's more reminders that I can look up and see every single night, brother.
That's an interesting way to put it, honestly. I never really thought.
Because if what you're saying is true, and the stories from the Bible may not be based off the stars, now, I don't want to give credence to certain people on this, but I'm going to say hypothetically, if the stories in the Bible are stories from the past of ... that we were able to pull good messages out of, that the people that wrote this book said, you know what, no, that does go in line with our faith. This doesn't disprove our faith. If anything, all it said was pay your tithe, do as you're told, follow the rules. So if the stars went in line with what God's word said, why wouldn't they use the stars to go hand in hand with it?
So then
that makes sense to me.
It does. So then my question would be, why is this cipher that I've come up with? Why is this cipher, or that I discovered, and these patterns? If the Bible is so unique, which it is in a lot of ways, but if the Bible is the book out of all the books, then why does this pattern show up in every other historical text or every other holy text, I should say?
Now, describe the pattern to me, because when you
Basically,
say
it's
that,
12 signs and the keywords in each sign, and then you use those keywords to place the stars, like I did in the video, basically.
all right, so give me a quick example of just any one.
There's one in Gilgamesh where I have a whole bunch of videos. I don't have them all off the top of my head because I've done like 40 of them. But I've done the Epic of Gilgamesh. I've done 2 other Sumerian tablets, the Enuma Elish, the Code of Hammurabi, the Book of the Dead.
All over, bro. Good
the
for
Quran.
you.
Yeah, and this pattern is found in all of them. So as much as I could say I could understand and feel what you're saying too, I have to say is this is also in all these other texts. So how do you place special significance on the Bible over the other texts if the other predated texts still have this encoding in it?
So let me put it like this. You yourself said that you don't believe that the Bible is incorrect. How did you word it? You said the Bible has no falsehoods in it, but it doesn't mean it's the whole truth. Is that how you worded it?
No falsehoods, but it's not the whole.
Or if it wasn't you, then it was another guest we had on around the same time. Basically, he was saying, I find no fault with the Bible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe it. Like, the message that it's preaching is good shit. The history lesson behind it, hey, who could refute it? But I just don't get down with it because of X, Y, and Z reasons that they disbelieved. You know what I mean? And that's fine. But when you look at these stories from the past that have made their way into the Bible, or even arguably the Bible had a whole separate story going on, the other people around the world had their story going on. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I will say that, if anything, how does that not just go hand in hand? Like, if you're saying you found this cipher, and okay, you say Gilgamesh, which constellation goes with Gilgamesh, which in turn would go with Noah, which in turn would go with all the other flood stories per the zodiacs?
Right. So,
or is there a zodiac that goes with that?
Well, it would have to. Let me hold on a sec. I have to open my.
The basis that you're questioning. Maybe I'm off base here.
No, it's fine. Hold on a sec.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this talk, by the way, sir. It's very rare that I get to have this kind of conversation with people that can keep up.
I appreciate it.
No doubt, bro.
So let me see here. I'm trying to get you a good example.
You're good. I was about to say, do you edit, or is this straight up on there? What we record is what gets sent.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, cool. To all the good viewers out there, if I was talking shit, my apologies.
So where it says, this is in book 2, it says, marveling, the shepherds crowded around him.
Wait, pause. Book 2 of the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It says, marveling, the shepherds crowded around him. What an enormous man, they whispered. How much like Gilgamesh he is, tall and strong with muscles like rock. They led him to the table. They put bread and beer in front of him. So I say that the shepherd represents Aries, because that's the flock. The enormous man is the enormous man in the sky, Aquarius. The bread and the beer comes from the wheat for the bread and the barley for the beer, which is in Virgo. So just as an example, the Epic of Gilgamesh is encoded that way too. That's just one example, but of my presentation. But it's the same thing. In fact, one of the slides that I have shows 17 different examples.
Damn.
Gilgamesh, yeah. So it's
constellations being brought up in the story.
Remember, you have the 12 zodiacs, but that's not all they knew. They had a whole bunch of other constellations that they knew about at the time.
Right, and these are just the ones that were on the horizon.
These are the ones that you could see throughout the area. You got to remember, Jacob, there was no light pollution or industry. Right. So you could go outside and see everything.
Right. Absolutely.
Like every night, you can go outside and see everything. Like if the slightest thing moved, you would notice it.
But then also to the story of Gilgamesh here, he was born, right? And they compared him to Gilgamesh, meaning that the child that was just born was not Gilgamesh, correct?
Right.
Right. They put before him beer, which was very prevalent in their society. We know that from a lot of clay pots that we found with the remnants of
We
beer
do,
and
but the
fermented
interesting
drinks.
thing too is they're always talking about the beer, the oil, the wine, and the bread. And that's all astrologically significant. When you're talking about animal sacrifice, it's always the goat, the bull, and the sheep or the ram. And those three are astrologically significant as well, too. So there's
But
a
you know
lot.
why?
Yeah, no, go on. What were you about to say?
I was going to say they're also significant to human civilization. Bread, water, wine, arguably, but I mean, find me a group of happy people that are sober. It's hard to find. And wine or beer, same thing. Then you said sheep, very important to agriculture from the beginning of history. Goats, same thing. And bulls, same thing. So everything you just listed would have been important to anyone, period, ever across all of human existence. So would they bring that into their religious texts?
Well, no, I mean, okay, so even if they did that, that would be one thing. But the fact that they make distinct patterns in the sky is a completely different level.
But again, the patterns in the sky are just what they did with their version of connected dots. You see Virgo the Virgin with bread or the barley and wheat. I could just as easily see it in M1 Abrams tank. It's no basis of a religion to say that they looked up and saw this. You could see anything. They brought in significance to their religion, which they were basing off the stars and basing off the moon. They brought in everything that was important to them. They made it important to their religion. Bread, wine, water, goats, bulls. Absolutely.
Okay, so then why would it be encoded then?
What do you mean encoded? That doesn't sound like an encoded. That sounds like somebody's making a mention.
But they're all mentioning them together, and again, they're forming patterns in the sky.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying, that they were very important, but it's the same.
Every civilization brought them up because they had other every civilization.
They had other things too. They had other forms of drink. They had other forms of food. It's always the same exact stuff that's brought up throughout each and every book.
Best. That's the thing. Beer at the time was considered the best because it was one of the only alcoholic drinks they had on standby. Wine, the best wine. It couldn't just be any old wine. It had to be the best wine that was sacrificed. Sheep. They had flocks of sheep. It had to be the best one that was sacrificed. That was the whole purpose. It's not just random shit you could find around your house. It was supposed to be your absolute first and your best that was ever sacrificed. And whenever things are brought up in relativity to the stories and the basis of them all, if you look, whenever Jesus was born, for instance, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, these are three luxury items that are not needed, but were brought before him as gifts for a king. When you're talking about other deities around the world, people didn't, like you said, this boy was born. They didn't know that he was a deity. They compared him to Gilgamesh. They just knew he was a giant human or a giant humanoid. So they just presented him with shit out of respect for whatever the fuck this monster is about to grow up to be. That makes sense to me. They wouldn't be showing reverence and respect to a baby that was born with nothing special thus far. You just got born. Unless there was another portion of the story that
between me and you is that you take the Bible as a history book, whereas I take it as completely metaphorical.
I take it as both. Like I said, the Old Testament, I absolutely take as a history lesson. It is 1000% a story to teach us how we got here, not the nitty gritty, the absolute bare minimum of what we needed to know, to the point to where we needed Jesus. Why did he come? Why did God send him? And then from that point onward, how we're supposed to live by that example. The history book portion of that is what the Jews, in my belief system and what they believe today, is the Torah. They have the Talmud after that, which is their rule books on things, which I get. But the Old Testament itself, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians all agree that these are historical facts up until the point of Moses. And then even after that, they can agree to certain things to an extent, maybe with a different opinion on the matter, but the events that took place, they can still agree on to a degree. So I take all of that as a history lesson, but I also take the Bible as a whole as my portion. I don't believe that God wants humans to know the whole plan. I don't think that our human brains could handle it. And I don't want to know the whole plan. I don't want to know why things are the way they are. I want to understand why they are to where I can understand it. And I always give this example. How do you explain sex to a 5-year-old? You know, you don't give them the nitty gritty. You might
give them the stork, the birds, and the bees. But that's my problem. That's what the Bible is. If you read it literally about these stories, we have like talking donkeys and all this kind of stuff in it. They're meant to be stories that you evolve from the literal belief and spiritually work on yourself to get to the deeper meanings.
Old Testament, we're not supposed to, like the history lesson part, the story part, like you would say, the mythological part of it, which you believe the whole book is, but fair. We can at least agree on a portion of the Old Testament. Yeah, in my opinion, that's exactly what it's supposed to be.
So why would
baseline?
Okay, so why would we're talking about the book of Job being the oldest book? Why wouldn't that be the first book of the Bible? Why would the first book of the Bible be Genesis?
Because the first book of the Bible should be the creation story. Job was written in a time where the world was already a thing. Humans already walked the earth. The entire Bible was written in a time where humans walked the earth, but Genesis is based in a time before the earth even existed. Job is based in a time when the earth did exist. So to put them in chronological order makes sense to me. Or at least a quote-unquote type of chronological order. Like, I guarantee that the sun was not created before Job walked the earth. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that could be agreed on, sure. Right. So when you watch my video, when you watch my long video, you say it just opens you up to a new level, right? Yeah. But it doesn't take away anything from your belief. I can live with that. You know, I'm not.
And the reason why
I'm not out there trying to fight with people at all. No. But you know, from where I stand, I believe the whole thing is metaphorical, and I believe that the astrology that I've been studying and putting into it has been about 11 years now. I believe you need to study, or as Malcolm Gladwell says, put your 10,000 hours in to each one of these sciences to understand wholly the numerological and the gematria, the etymology, you know, all these sciences.
I couldn't agree more with you, bro. The symbolism behind it, the everything, right? And like I said, the Bible, I believe, is my portion. Just like the Hebrews leaving Egypt had their manna from heaven, which was their portion. It wasn't too little. It wasn't too much. It was exactly what they needed. I believe the Bible is my manna from heaven. I believe that it is my portion. It is not going to lead me astray and give me just like not enough, but it's also not going to lay the entire map out for me. It is going to answer the questions that I can come up with this one shot of life that I got. That's what I believe it is.
So how do you evolve further than where you are right now? Because I'm always trying to evolve my thinking to understand more and to grow more. And I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong or things of that nature. Sure. But how do you know, you're very secure in your beliefs. You can learn something new and then just basically table it and file it away. How do you continue to grow?
So I am also a firm believer of if you don't know your past, you will not have a future. So when me personally, what I do to have a grow in my faith and further my walk with God and my relationship with Jesus, what I do is, first off, I always go into the Old Testament and I do a little bit of digging there, which for the record, I don't like have to find something to look up. I'm a very history-based person. So to look into something in the Old Testament is really, really fun for me, right? But when it comes to things that I struggle with in my day-to-day life, right? I'm furthering myself and furthering my walk by trying to become a better version of myself. And in my opinion, the best version of myself would be the strongest Christian version of myself I can be. Now, granted, I am not a good living representation of what it means to be a Christian. I fully get that. I got a mouth like a Marine because I am one, and I'm not exactly a perfect person, but who is? That being said, what I would like to do every day more and more is try to be a better father, try to be a better husband, try to be a better worker, all these things, which the Bible tells us to do, and it teaches us how to do that. And what I believe is that if I keep my children at the center focus of every decision that I make, everything else will shake out accordingly. And to further exemplify that, I believe that if I keep God and I keep my faith, not the church, not the stories, not Mr. Pastor Man, if I can keep God and what I know to be good and moral at the center focus of every decision that I make, everything else behind me should shake out accordingly. That's kind of how I'm at with it. And as far as my own personal deep diving goes, dude, I'm always digging into things. I'm always listening to some new, not necessarily a pastor, but a podcast or somebody who's looking at it from a new perspective. And to be honest with you, a lot of people like yourself you're not out to disprove the Bible, but I do listen to a lot of people who are out to disprove the Bible, not because it gives me ammo to fire back on haters one day, but because it forces me to look at things from a new perspective. And I enjoy that more than anything.
Speaking about looking at things from a new perspective, and I'm going to close on this. Yeah. I did in that video include my What is God speech.
I have not listened to it yet. You said you had a whole presentation on what it's got. Did you not?
Yeah.
Dude, send me it.
All right.
Because I would
we'll
love
do
to
a
have that
follow-up
talk
on
with
that.
you another day.
We'll do a follow-up on that. I think you'll find it interesting. Jacob, man, this has been great. Honestly, you're a great person. You're a great representation. I wish more Christians were like you, to be honest with you. We need to be able to have civil disclosure. In this society, if you believe one thing and someone else believes something else, they teach you that they're enemies. And we can't have that.
Up. Everybody's camped up and clicked up and divided.
There's no unifying this country right now, which is unfortunate.
It's sad, but it's not even just this country, man. It's even within each individual faith. You have Sunnis and Shiites that have been killing each other since the beginning of time. You have Kurds that everybody hates. You have 7 genocides around the world going on that has even nothing to do with anything else. Bro, people are just shitty to each other. And you're right. They do that on purpose. They keep us divided so that we can never unanimously come together and be like, hey, wait a minute now. I actually don't dislike what you're saying.
Right.
I disagree with it, but I dislike it. Like, would you like to discuss it further? They don't want that. They don't want people opening their minds and being free, independent thinkers and having critical thinking skills to make their own decisions.
All right.
And it's also pastors do not want that either. Just going to throw that out. It's not just politicians.
True. All right, brother. I'm going to have this uploaded. I'm going to try and do it tonight. I'll send you the link, and then you let me know what you think, okay? All
right. Can I shameless plug real quick?
Yeah, please. No, I always end with that. Let everyone know where to find you.
Definitely, man. Definitely. So if y'all have not heard about me yet, you have now. It is on the Cult of Conspiracy podcast. We're on all platforms except for YouTube because they don't like our content. We talk about mean things, apparently. But check us out on all the listening platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that. Also, go check out my spinoff podcast called Prophecy Playbook. It airs every Monday. It's a little 15-minute segment about end-time prophecies in the geopolitical areas and what it looks like today. Also, my co-host has one called The Library of Conspiracies, where he does an even deeper dive on some of the more nuanced and specific conspiracies that we may blaze through on an episode, but somebody might want a little more education on. So go check us out anywhere on there. And brother, thank you so much for having me on the show. This was a blast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It definitely was.
Yeah.